Thanks, guys. I hope you all had some nice Christmas celebrations this week. I really do. We did. We woke up, I think, for the first time ever in our house with grandchildren in our house on Christmas morning. And that was just delightful to see them open gifts in our living room. And isn't that selfish that we want them in our house, but as the grandparents? But it's never happened before for lots of reasons. And it was a beautiful thing to share together. And then a bunch of our extended family came over, and we crammed too many people into our small living room, and it was beautiful. So, and I have I just want to say before I preach this morning that I have a lot. Good morning, Karen. How beautiful to see you here. That's the Karen you all have been praying for on Sunday mornings. So if you didn't know. I just want to say that I have a lot of gratitude for this community and the beautiful Christmas we've had together this season. I feel a little bit, although I'm exhausted from Christmas, I feel a little bit like the little boy that you might have seen him on that video Todd made, the little boy that came out of Night in Bethlehem, and he said, "I just never wanted it to end." And there is a part of me that feels that way because I've watched this community this Christmas just do a bunch of different things together. Gifts for children, pulling off the ridiculousness of Night in Bethlehem again, which was amazing. Over 700 people coming through here, and all those kids and people just soaking it up and kind of in a tactile way, kind of seeing and touching and experiencing something of God coming into the world. And then last Sunday, I just thought God was present in beautiful ways in our candlelight gatherings, and so it's been marvelous, and I just feel really grateful to be a part of this community, if I can say it that simply. So, and to kind of lead into what I want to share with you this morning, I'm feeling a lot this particular Christmas, in the wake of this Christmas. Most of you know that Linda and I grew up Roman Catholic, and there were some beautiful traditions with all of that around Advent and Christmas. But then we've spent decades of our adulthood in what I often call the more evangelical stream of the church, you know. And in that stream, prior to the way it has evolved at LifeSpring, Christmas was never accorded the same value as, say, Easter, because the incarnation was seen to be that Jesus was born so that he could have a body in which to take our punishment for sin on the cross when he grew up. So the purpose of the incarnation is you needed a little Jesus so you could later have a grown-up Jesus who could then, die in a particular way for the sins of mankind. So the birth only served and pointed toward this transactional atonement to a retributive God, which I now regard as a gross distortion, actually, of who God is, that kind of atonement theology. I regard it now as a misunderstanding of the cross and a theology that actually works. This is not what my sermon's about, by the way. But it's a theology that actually works against us seeing the radically humble and sacrificially loving heart of God. Instead, that theology paints this whole picture of an offended God who can't bring himself to forgive us until somebody pays. But be that as it may, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that the incarnation has not always gripped me the way it does now. It has never gripped me, perhaps, the way it does this year. And for some reason, this Christmas, God coming into the world as a child feels to me like it contains, like in itself, it contains the wholeness and the glory of the good news. You know, that word means gospel, but it really means good news. Maybe I can say it this way. Instead of seeing the incarnation as just a way to get Jesus to the cross, I hear the words at the end of the New Testament, "Behold, I make all things new." And then I glance back at the manger and I go, of course. And it feels like the tumblers fall into place. And everything in between is just to that end of making all things new. Let me read you a little of Matthew's account of the birth. This is from Matthew chapter 2 in his gospel. Um, he says, now when the Magi had departed, we're going to talk about the Magi next week, kind of reverse order, but when the Magi had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. And when he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, out of Egypt I called my son. Skipping down a few verses. Now when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, arise, take the young child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who sought the young child's life are dead. And then he arose and took the young child and his mother and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned by God in a dream, because this guy had a very bad reputation, and being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside into the region of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. So some people think that Matthew is equating Jesus with those who took the Nazarite vow in the Old Testament. Nazarite, Nazarene. The Nazarites were these guys who took a sacred vow to live for a certain vow that they had made to fulfill. And as part of that, they didn't cut their hair, they didn't drink alcohol. Samson, if you remember the story of Samson and why it was a tragedy when his hair got cut off, Samson was a Nazarite. He had taken a Nazarite vow. So some people think, well, that's what he'll be called a Nazarene, and they equate that. But that's not really what's going on here. When Matthew points out what town they settled in, he's connecting Jesus to all the old. So you would know this if you were a Jew reading Matthew's gospel, but we aren't Jews reading Matthew's gospel for the most part, so we don't know, because we don't know the Hebrew. So he's connecting Jesus to all the Old Testament prophecies that call the Messiah the branch that will come from David's line. A branch will come from the stump of Jesse, who was David's father. A branch will come from David. Because Nazareth means, you ready? Branch town. So Matthew is saying, isn't it fitting that the Messiah, the branch of the Lord, settled in Branch Town? My favorite of those branch references is Isaiah 4:2. I wonder this morning if you'll be able to tell in this sermon how I got where I end up and where I'm going. But it all makes sense in my head. I just want you to know that. It is a chain of good things. Isaiah, in the beginning of his book, 700 years before Jesus, in the beginning, the first 3 chapters of his book, he's going on and on and on about how the people of Israel have forgotten him, forgotten the Lord, and they've turned aside to false idols, and they've become judgmental and violent, and how their women have become haughty and, well, slutty. Go read it. I'm just telling you what Isaiah says. And so Isaiah's just talking about how Israel has fallen apart. They've forgotten the Lord, and so they've forgotten everything good about being a human being, and how God is going to allow them to be carried off into exile in Assyria and Babylon. And then after 3 chapters of all this terrible stuff, there's a dead stop. And in chapter 4, verse 2, Isaiah says, and in that day, the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious. It's like, it's all a mess. And then he says, but the branch of the Lord is beautiful and glorious. And I like the suddenness with which Isaiah says this, because I think you can be looking around you and you can see all kinds of terrible things in the world, and you can see all kinds of obstacles and difficulties in your own life and all kinds of reasons to be hopeless. But then if you are able to turn your eyes and behold Christ, behold the branch of the Lord, even as he lies in the manger, you suddenly remember that the branch of the Lord is beautiful and glorious. I said I'm feeling a lot in the wake of this particular Christmas. What I'm feeling is an awe over the beauty of God. When we take Jesus in the Gospels, as he's loving people, as he's healing people, as he's extending compassion and grace and forgiveness, what we see might be described as goodness accompanied by open-heartedness and tender-heartedness. And even the child in the manger is radiating this, because a child is open, a child is vulnerable, and a child is without guile. A little baby doesn't play any angles. All children come into the world this way, right? Open, vulnerable, they don't know how to play angles yet. They come into the world this way simply because they are babies. They come into the world this way by no choice of their own. But that's the thing. God chooses this form. God chooses to come into the world with openness, with vulnerability, with no angles, as a child, so that our first glimpse of him is humble, open, vulnerable, and with no angles to play. There's no manipulation, there's no coercion, there's no mask. Looks this way, but it's really this way, like we all learn to do as we get older in this life. And I'm going to tell you this morning, and you might just stop hearing everything else I say and say, oh, that just sounds so simplistic, Pastor Fran, whatever. But I'm going to tell you this morning that we need the beauty of God. Because it is the beauty of God encompassing his goodness of heart, his gentleness, his compassion, his humility, his self-giving love, and his courage to live these things. It is the beauty of God that not only heals us, but which is the very picture of our humanity in its full and whole state. And as I find myself here, a few days after Christmas, kneeling as it were in awe before the beauty of God, I bring this up because I don't think among Christians today that we really see it. I wanted to say, when I was first writing these notes, that we dance around it, that we kind of have an idea of the beauty of God, but we dance around it. But honestly, I'm not sure most of us as Christians, and I'm not judging anyone beyond myself, but I'm not sure that we see it enough even to be dancing around it. And if there's any way I can draw your eyes to it before this Christmas falls into our rearview mirror, I would like to do that. You see, all Christians think that God is big and God is great, right? Everybody has that idea, right? God is up there. God is big. God is great. He's the one. But what Christ reveals from the manger to his true heart and his compassionate ministry to people, to his absorption of our fear and hatred on the cross, what Christ reveals is that God is big and great in a way that is radically and beautifully reverse of our ideas of bigness and greatness. I think this can be particularly difficult for men to come to terms with, to be honest. Jesus describes himself as humble and gentle in heart. How many of us as guys walk into a social gathering with other men and somebody says, how you doing? You say, just feeling humble and gentle in heart, man, you know? That's where I'm at. But that's how Jesus describes himself. Culture and families and the unsafe machismo and aggression and competitiveness of other men have taught us that to be open, to be approachable, to be gentle, to be non-defensive, these are unsafe and unwise choices. So at the very least, we are tempted to be guarded. And so often to be more than that, to be aggressive or dominating. I like to say to puff our chest out as men. That feeling that we must outwardly display our strength in all situations. And can I just say that now I think more women than ever are tempted to let themselves be shaped this way. It's understandable because we have held women down and we have silenced women and we have disempowered women pretty much in the history of the world, and we're only really beginning to emerge from that in our own Western culture. So it's very understandable. So because now that those chains are beginning to be removed, women often feel like they have to protect that new territory, that and in order to do that, they're going to have to be invulnerable. They're going to have to be more aggressive. And I get it. I totally get it. It is the natural reaction. But it's still not going to lead to wholeness. If we think, men and women, I've talked about men, I've talked about women, let me lump us all together in a sweeping generalization. If we think, men and women, that this is the only way we can survive and live, by being guarded, by projecting an aggressive sort of strength, if we think that this is the only way we can survive and live, then we are saying that the manger and the cross are wrong-headed and failed strategies. My experience, some of you know these stories, but many of you are new to our church and you don't. I have an interesting experience with all this business of open-heartedness and tender-heartedness. As a boy, I was a very tender-hearted boy. I had compassion for other people. I also got my own feelings hurt easily. I was the kid that cried at his own birthday party when I didn't get to ride whatever we were riding, a pony or something, more than all the other kids. I don't know what it was. But I had this soft heart. And somehow by the time even before I was a teenager, I began to sense, as we all do in different ways, that the world is not that safe a place. And you're going to get creamed sooner or later. And so I took that soft heart of mine, and of course all this, you're young. All this is unconscious. All this is subconscious. I took that soft heart of mine and I buried it away as deep as I possibly could. I will guarantee you that there was only one kid at Washington Junior High School in Naperville who got in more fights than I did across 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Because I decided that the way you survive in the world is you got to be the toughest guy on the block, which was really interesting because I was the second smallest kid in the school in 8th grade, right? So when I was in the older grade, I was the second smallest kid in the school. Thank God for Mike Kokosinski, who was shorter than me. And I lived that way. And then I came to faith as a teenager, which was I reflect on this and it's so interesting. I came to faith and I had this experience of God's love, and I knew I had this sense of being lost. I don't mean like lost like you're going to hell, lost, just lost as a human being. I was friendless, I was alone, I was lost, I didn't know what life was about, and God came and found me, and I had this experience, I had this growing experience of God's love, but I did not let my heart come out to play. I stayed tough. And then by the time I got to my early 20s, where I got my hands on this book, a tough guy with the Bible is really something, let me tell you. You've heard of people beating people up with the Bible? Oh, baby, come on in my ring because I got the book open. And so that's, and then, so Linda and I, we got married young, we journeyed along, two beautiful kids. Our son Luke and his wife Joy are sitting back here this morning, who's up here. If you wonder who that guy with the beard was playing bass, that's my boy. So, who's not really a boy anymore. And we're going along, and but I became. Here's an oxymoron for you. I became an aggressively dominating Christian. And then in our late 20s, a lot of things came unglued in the circumstances of our life. Health things, money things, depression things, business things. And God used that to, that verse that says God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble? Well, he opposed the proud at my house, in me, in my late 20s. And I began to recognize that I had made him into something inside myself that he really wasn't. And as I began to pray, God, what do you want from me? Who am I supposed to be then? If I'm not that, if I'm not this guy, right, who am I? And all this softness, this tenderness started to come up inside me, and I was like, it was the first time in 17 years that cork had been unsealed, and I was like, oh no. And I said, Lord, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be tenderhearted. I don't want to be the guy who cries. I don't want to be that guy that's soft. I don't want to be that guy. And this is, there's probably 6 times in my life that I can tell you God almost verbally, I don't mean with these ears, but in my soul just said like, this is what the Lord said to me. This is what the Holy Spirit said to me. Well, that's too bad because that's how I made you. And I was like, damn, I'm sorry. But I was just like, this is terrible. I'm telling you this morning that the only way for you to become a whole human being again is that you have to have an epiphany of the beauty of the Lord, which ultimately means love in its many splendored ways. Do you realize that all our making ourselves impervious, all our guardedness, all our aggression, all our defensiveness, all our need to look strong in the eyes of others, it's just fear. Does anybody remember what John tells us about fear when he says that perfect love? What do we think that means? It means that when you actually begin to realize in your being that you were made in love, this is not religious talk, folks, that you were made in love, that you are held in love, and that you will arrive at love. And you have some kind of mystical encounter with this love. I'm sorry to say it that way, but I don't know how else to say it to you. It has to be experiential, that you begin to realize like, oh, love, that you're made in this love, you're held in this love, the destination is this love. It's when that happens that your fear will begin to lose its reason for being. And I'm not saying I've arrived at that, but I've experienced it. Now listen, you can take your heart in any of a number of directions in your life, and that's your choice. You can keep it hidden. That's what some people do. That's what I did for a long time. You can protect it. You can work to satisfy yourself and fulfill yourself. You can find the persona or mask that works for you. You can let the ego convince itself what its rights are or how great the self is. And if you do any of those things or all of those things or some mixture of those things, there will be good and bad parts of that. There will be good things about it. There will be bad things about it, all mixed together. That's the journey of life. I'm not saying that any of those things is all bad. But, and here's the ridiculous statement I'm going to make, and I'm telling you it's true, and I'm telling you it's at the heart of the good news Jesus came to bring. So here it is. You can pursue all those choices about what to do with your heart and how to shape yourself, even if you're doing it subconsciously, which you are, by the way. But if you don't understand and surrender to beauty, you will inevitably be trapped in the shadows of the false self that you've created, and your wholeness as a human being will continue to elude you. It's really interesting to me that both Jesus and Paul, when they talk specifically about what they call our slavery, by the way, it's interesting. Did you catch that in the Matthew passage where Matthew says that, this whole thing of Joseph having to take the family down into Egypt for protection and then coming back? Matthew says this was so that it could be fulfilled what the prophet said, out of Egypt I called my son. That's a verse from Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. And Matthew's really telling us something bigger. He's not just saying like, oh, they went down to Egypt. So that's kind of like the Egypt thing in the Old Testament. If you follow this thread through the New Testament, which I don't have time to walk you through this morning, if you follow this thread, the whole business of the gospel is about coming out of Egypt. The whole business of the gospel is about us coming out of our slavery, coming out of our bondage, coming out of our darkness. So Jesus, I got to give you a tidbit. Get this. So Matthew says, out of Egypt I called my son. This is the beginning, right? So then, the very next chapter of Matthew, the reason Matthew doesn't tell us anything about the childhood, I think, about the growing up years, is he wants to cut to the next link in the chain. And the next link in the chain is John the Baptist standing in the Jordan River at the very spot where the Israelites crossed in to Canaan, into the promised land 1,500 years earlier. And Jesus stands up in the water as the new Moses. And John says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Well, what is that about? Well, do you remember that on the night the Israelites left Egypt? This is a whole nother sermon now. That on the night the Israelites left Egypt, God said, take a lamb and take its blood and put its put its blood on the lintels, the top of the frame and the doorposts of your house. So we've heard who takes away the sin of the world as who took the punishment for our sins. Here's a better way to hear what John is saying. Behold the Lamb of God who makes possible your escape from slavery. That's what John is saying. And so Jesus stands there in the Jordan River as the new Moses to lead people into new life. Out of Egypt, I called my son. So when Jesus and Paul talk about slavery, which they do, they talk to us, they talk to the people they're talking with about slavery and what that means. It's so interesting to me because what they're talking about is being trapped in darkness, right? Being trapped in all these things we can't see, going through the same dysfunctional cycles in life over and over, what the Bible calls sin, call it darkness. It's fueled by fear. Don't get hung up on the words, it's the mess. And when they talk about our being trapped in the mess, they do not tell us that the solution is us working harder at being good. Jesus tells the Pharisees, you're slaves, and they say, we're not slaves. We haven't been slaves to anybody for, since way back there, And Paul says, we're in slavery. Paul's very honest. He says, I'm in slavery to all this darkness. But they don't say, we got to work harder to be good so we can get out of this slavery. We got to work harder to be good. What they both say is, that what will make us free is an epiphany that we are, in fact, the sons and daughters of God. Henry Nouwen would say that we need to hear the voice that calls us the beloved. And I don't have time to take into these passages, but if you don't believe me, go read John chapter 8, Romans chapter 8. Dallas Willard used to say that we have embraced a gospel of sin management. But Jesus and Paul tell us, they don't tell us that we need to manage our sin. They tell us that we need a revelation of our belovedness in order to change how we operate. Because it is the revelation of our belovedness that takes away all the reasons that our fear exists. This is the same word the Father spoke over his Son, right? This is my beloved Son. You've heard it translated in whom I am well pleased, which makes it sound like, yeah, he liked Jesus because Jesus did everything right. That's not how it should be translated. This is my beloved Son, in whom I delight. This is my beloved daughter, in whom I delight. This is my beloved son, in whom I delight. This is my beloved daughter, in whom I delight. It is the revelation of our belovedness, that the big defining thing about us is that we are the sons and daughters of God, that we are held in this love that is bigger than all. The song, remember last week, the song that's bigger than everything else, that nothing can ever drown out. Me walking around and telling you, saying to you, you are a beloved son, you are a beloved daughter, that is actually harder to hear than if I walked around and told you all what horrible sinners you are. Because that's what you've heard all your life from religion. That we are radically and beautifully loved with no conditions is not what we have been told all our lives, but it is the truth. Really what we're talking about here is the healing of our souls, and it happens by love, which allows you to see the things that you couldn't see before. And while I certainly can't tell you everything about your own journey of healing, what that will be, I can tell you that it's by love. And that neither simply guarding your heart or chasing everything that you think you want will heal your soul. It won't. And then as the beauty of love finds us and these other things that we thought were the prime directive of life begin to fall away, we can come and we can kneel down before the manger and we can kneel down before the crucified, and we will have no words for the beauty and the goodness that we behold. That's how I feel this Christmas. In my mind's eye, when I think of God, open, vulnerable, no angles, humble, lowly, virtually at our mercy, lying in a manger. See, this is the problem with being a preacher. You guys are asking me to stand up here and talk about things for which there are no words. They're too beautiful. We won't have words, but we will taste its joy, and our soul will gaze on that beauty and say, I want to become that. When John says that light has come into the world and the darkness has not comprehended it, this is what he's talking about. This revelation of our belovedness. So this is my prayer for you this morning. On the 29th of December, after Christmas. Close your eyes and I'll say it. My dearest brothers and sisters, my friends, my companions in the journey, may you not walk away from the manger this Christmas season without some sense of the beauty of the Lord devastating you into nakedness, joy, and the hope of the beautiful way. For the word of the manger to us is simply, behold, I am making all things new.